He's an award-winning investigative journalist, and his books detail things that now are being talked about in court. That's why you saw David Cay Johnson everywhere. You know, CNN, MS, all of these different outlets. Every time I looked up, David Cay Johnson was on television. They knew that, is that him on CNN? I love that. They knew that this is the guy, the last stop when it comes to Trump and his dealings and essentially the way he organized and ran his business. Here he is joining us from Belgium. Thank you, David Cay Johnson. Hi, David.
Hello, Mark.
Wow. You're the man of the moment. So they are laying bare. It's really like your books, what they're talking about. All the ways that he inflated values and deflated values depending on the situation, the completely corrupt accounting. Help us decode some of this.
Well, Donald, his whole life, has said things are bigger than they are. Trump Tower, he claims, is 68 stories tall. It's 58. He says, I'm the biggest developer in New York City. He wasn't even in the top 10. And this goes on and on and on. And Donald wanted to be, on the Forbes 400 list. Now, the Forbes 400 list misses lots of billionaires. In one of my books, I point out that there are 9 billionaires, or there were at the time, in the Rochester area where I live in Western New York. But according to Forbes, there was only one. And that's because Forbes' work is based on publicly traded companies. So if you have private companies, they don't have a way to measure you. Or you're someone like Donald Trump who goes to great lengths to persuade them that you're really a multi-billionaire and you should be there. And right now, one of the things everybody has been missing is Donald Trump and his sons have been attacking the judge in this civil fraud suit in New York, Arthur Engoron, for saying the value of Mar-a-Lago is in the range neighborhood of $18 to $26 million. The sons have said, no, it's worth $1 billion. It's worth hundreds of millions of dollars. There's a vacant lot next door that's worth $2 million, $200 million, except nobody's buying it. Well, here's the problem with that for the Trumps. Palm Beach County, Florida, assessed Mar-a-Lago at $26 million, meaning it would owe about $500,000 a year in property taxes. And Donald Trump complained that, no, it's not worth anything near that. And every time there's an issue about valuation, Donald Trump's valuation is high. It's never low. And we're not talking about, 10%. Say my house is worth $300,000, because in Western New York, houses aren't expensive. And I tell the bank it's worth $330,000. Well, that's not fraud. But if I tell the bank it's worth $300 million or $30 million or even $3 million, that's fraud. Well, Donald, claimed that his mansion and grounds in Westchester County, just north of Manhattan, at one point, he argued they were worth $291 million. The highest appraisal he had was $30 million, and that was based on his being able to carve it up and sell lots for 8 other mansions. Well, the local authorities said, no, you cannot carve it up. This is a one single parcel of property, end of story, which means it's worth nowhere near $30 million. And yet he's claiming $291 million. And he claimed that apartments that are rent regulated are just as valuable as those that can be sold in the free market for whatever the market will bear. And the judge said, this is a fantasy. And this is for Donald worse than, I think, the prospect that he might go to jail, which I think he severely doubts. He thinks he'll be convicted, but I think he believes that because he was a former president, he won't go to jail. Because Donald is his money. He is this empty vessel he keeps trying to fill with money, imaginary and real. And it's been that way his entire life. And it's it's a very sad story on some.
And yeah, it's interesting that you kind of touch on the psychology of him. With psychologically empty vessel. I also thought, though, and it's funny. I just thought of you instantly when he started showing up to the trial, because of course, David, you would tell us he doesn't need to be at this trial, right? This is not like some of these other indictments.
Well, he's on the
cases.
witness list, and so when he is subpoenaed to show up as a witness, he'll have to show up. But no, he came to divert attention from the fact that, first of all, he's not really doing any campaigning. He's going along saying, well, I have this 30-point margin among Republicans in the primaries, so what do I need to campaign for? I don't need to answer questions. I don't need to participate in these Fox News debates, if you want to dignify them by calling them debates. And he showed up to vent his anger. And the reporters who were there in the room from a whole host of news organizations all similarly came to the view, and I think the TV footage supports it, and my history of knowing Donald supports that he's livid. He's beyond belief livid because, Donald grew up in a household with this monster of a father, Fred Trump. Fred Trump had a business partner, Willie Tomasello, who was a front for the Genovese and Gambino mob families in New York. And Fred became a very rich man. And his view and what he taught his children was, you get the money. As long as you don't get arrested, you get the money. Along comes, when Donald is in his 20s, the notorious Roy Cohn from the McCarthy hearing era. And Cohn, who Donald has called his second father, teaches him, if law enforcement ever comes after you, not just criminal law enforcement, but civil law enforcement, they're corrupt, they're crooked, you did nothing wrong. It doesn't matter how clear the evidence is, you never concede anything. And you demand they be investigated. You demand they be, which is exactly what we've seen him doing. And that 74 million people voted for this con artist, and that clearly many tens of millions of people in America believe he is this business genius and can't see that he's a con artist, tells you about why con artists succeed. Because people turn off their skepticism. And once you've been had by a con artist, and that can be simply had by having gone around and called this man, the greatest president of all time and other nonsense, come on, it's pretty hard to confess, yeah, I got taken. It's because it says, you're dumb, you're gullible, you made a mistake.
I think this is a great point you're making. Your self-image is associated with some of these choices that you make in life.
Donald knows perfectly well that if the public comes to realize that he's not this multi-billionaire, he's not this great successful businessman, because he's not, then everything falls apart for him. And I've pointed out that, all of his businesses will have to be sold. Because the Trump organization and the eyes wide open blind trust that he created when he became president, their business licenses have been canceled by this judge. And that means he's not in business right now. He can't be in business. The businesses will continue operating with a monitor watching over to make sure that Trump and his cronies and children don't loot it. But they will have to be disposed of. And the last person who will get paid when a receiver is eventually appointed and sells these businesses is Donald Trump. And he's not going to get premium prices. This is a fire sale caused by Donald Trump. Donald could, I emphasize that conditional word, could end up with nothing more than his presidential and television performer union pensions.
I want to follow up on some of these things, and I just want to remind everybody, because I've read these books and they're terrific, and they speak to the seeds of this having been sown throughout the building of his image. I wouldn't even want to call it an empire. It's really an empire of image. The making of Donald Trump, The Big Cheat, and It's Even Worse Than You Think. Those are all three books that David has written, and I just think you could, I've said it before, but The Making of Donald Trump, boy, David, you really get into how he has built this image. And so I think he's there in the court to protect that image you're talking about. He wants to, I have a bigger one than everybody else's type thing. I really feel like that's at the core as to why he's there.
Well, this is, the judge and Letitia James are Toto, who pulled back the curtain on the wizard.
Right.
And Donald is a wealthy man. I don't want anybody listening to this to misunderstand, but he's never been a billionaire. When he came down the escalator on June 16th of 2015, so we're talking about more than 8 years ago now, he said that he was worth more than $10 billion. He said it again and again and again. One time he said $11 billion. When he became president, he had to file his Office of Government Ethics form. And the first thing he did was say, well, I'll file it, but I'm not going to sign it. And they said, no. You have to sign under penalty of perjury, just like everybody else. Well, when I added up the numbers on that form, I come up with $1 billion. Forbes attributed a great deal to goodwill, the value of the Trump name beyond the revenue it's producing. And they came up with, I think it was $3.4 billion. In either event, that means that somewhere between 70 and almost 90% of the wealth Donald Trump claimed vanished between the summer of 2015 and January of 2017, a year and a half later. And the reason it vanished is it wasn't there. And even the numbers that were in that report as president, they were inflated beyond belief. Now, Donald used to get premium prices. Trump Tower, when it opened in 1983, November of 1983, technically, was one of only 2 luxury high-rise apartment buildings in Manhattan that didn't care who the buyer was. The other was owned by the family of Onassis, the family that the widow Jackie Kennedy married into. Anywhere else, you have a very hard time buying an apartment. My best friend just moved back to New York from San Francisco, and he and his wife, to get into their building, they're in the same building as Henry Kissinger, they had to fill out 604 pages of documentation to get their cooperative apartment. And as my buddy David Crook says, had the South discovered New York's co-op laws, the civil rights movement would have failed. Because the courts have held that it's a co-op, so you can reject people for any reason you want.
So ridiculous.
Yeah, it is. And so Donald would just take anybody's money. And there was a Russian guy who bought 5 apartments in Trump Tower. He showed up with literally suitcases full of cash. Donald went to the closing for this. And there were mobsters and others. And the example I use is, Donald also allowed people to buy in straw names, buy through an LLC shell company. More than half the value of Manhattan residential real estate is now held in such shell companies because of his opening up this aspect. It's not a co-op, by the way. You just own your apartment. It's a condo. And if you showed up, Mark, and said, well, I'm going to buy this in the name of Snow LLC, Snow Limited Liability Company, I'd say to you, I'm sorry, is that the name of a Vail ski resort, or is that a cocaine trafficking business? Donald would never ask that at all. He'd just say, well, sure, but I want 20% more for this apartment from you, because he knows that it's a cocaine business. And this court case, which is only about how much Donald must pay to disgorge his ill-got gains from his frauds. It's not about were you a fraudster. That's been established. He cannot appeal that. He can only appeal matters of law. He cannot appeal the judge's findings of fact, which were so overwhelming. The judge said, we don't even need to have a trial about that.
Stop right there, David, because this is very critical, because it's being talked about the appeal in sort of a reflexive way. And people are saying, well, of course he's going to appeal this. You've just carved out the judge's decision on the fraud and said he can't appeal that. He could appeal the penalty.
No. He can appeal if the judge made an error in the law. He can appeal.
I see.
Divide this into 2 parts. There's facts and there's the law.
Okay.
And the findings of fact by the trier of fact, which is the judge. There's no jury here. Trump's own lawyers went along with this. It may be a big mistake. On the other hand, Donald may have been afraid of a New York City, a Manhattan jury. I mean, we don't know.
Well, by the way, today, I don't know if you say or was it yesterday, I guess, when he was saying it's outrageous that I wasn't given a jury trial. I mean, isn't it? Yet his own attorneys are the reason that there's no jury trial. They waived it. They wanted just a judge anyway.
And remember how much Donald has run down New Yorkers. I mean, because he thinks that they are not his people. He lost badly in Manhattan, including in the precinct that Trump Tower's in. So Donald. This is to him a complete implosion of everything that he has stood for. He will go to his grave insisting he's never done anything wrong. In 2016, in an interview that I have the tape of, he told a radio show host, the host asked him, well, Mr. Trump, you're a Christian, so perhaps you could tell us and tell other Christians the last time you asked God for forgiveness. Of course, if you're actually a Christian, you're in a constant state of seeking forgiveness. And Donald said, forgiveness? What? Why would I ask for forgiveness? I've never done anything in my life that requires asking for forgiveness. What more do you need to know about how totally narcissistic and uninformed this man is? And as I pointed out in my books, Donald wrote 6 pages denouncing Christians as fools, idiots, and schmucks. Those are his words, not mine. And said his life philosophy is one word: revenge. You cannot believe in revenge and be a Christian. It is impossible. The whole point of the New Testament is no revenge. You are to love other people and be charitable and kind and help others. And that's not Donald's position. And he's articulated that as recently as January of 2020, the last time he went to the National Prayer Breakfast. So on the appeal matter, his lawyers are going to appeal. They're going to do everything they can. They get to go to 2 courts, an intermediary court of appeal in New York and the top court of appeal. In New York, we call our trial court the Supreme Court. It's a really stupid system, but that's what we do. The intermediary court may or may not hear a complaint which has to be about the law. If they complain about the findings of fact, they'll be dismissed out of hand. The top court in New York only takes about 100 cases a year. And there's no issue here for them to take. So I expect them to turn it down. And there's no federal issue here that Donald can present. What's he going to say? I'm part of a discriminated against group of minorities, rich white men.
I want to just and the fraud is everywhere. I mean, we haven't even touched on the fact that there's such obvious frauds, and as you say, he just throws these numbers out. The square footage of his residence, 30,000 square feet, is what he claimed. The judges, look, it's 10,000 square feet. We know it's 10,000 square feet, but this is an indisputable fact, just as these others are indisputable facts. But I mean, it boils down to all of these various things.
And he did that for a reason. He did it to justify claiming that the value of the apartment itself, his 3-story apartment, was on the order of $300 million. And you couldn't do that if it's only 10,000 square feet.
I see.
So these were done with a purpose. And Trump has tried to argue that, well, Alan Weisselberg did this and Jeff Connie did it, and I didn't know anything about it. And as every Trump executive I've known for the last 35 years, and as Michael Cohen has testified, nothing happens in the Trump organization, which at the top is a tiny little organization. Nothing happens in the Trump organization without being at the direction and approval of Mr. Trump. That's how Cohen put it.
Yeah.
So it's absurd to think that he's the victim of the people under him. And by the way, if Alan Weisselberg is really the criminal here who scammed everybody, how come he's still working for Donald Trump?
Well, he's not only working for him; he took the bullet for him, didn't he? He went to
he went to jail for Donald.
Yeah,
he went, that didn't surprise me. I think I've said on your show, I know I said in many places, that Alan Weisselberg has worked for the Trumps for so long that he is a wholly owned subsidiary of Donald's brain.
now, by the way, the reason I'm just seeing in the chat, the reason we talk about Trump and these specifics on his business is because he's in court about his business. He's in court about those things that he's declared. That's the reason. This isn't just gratuitous Trump hate. This is about the very essence of his image, which is all about wealth. That's why David is the most popular kid at the dance right now, because you've done so much reporting on his wealth. So he is turning this into a campaign, a campaign stop, in effect. He is campaigning off of it. He even references the fact that these indictments and these legal entanglements only serve to buoy him in polls. What is the net about this, David? I mean, again, you've said, look, these are the things that are going to happen to his business. It'll be put into, it's not a receivership per se, but I guess it's got,
it will be. It will become a receivership when this is over. So 8 years ago, more than 8 years ago, I was saying that Donald Trump could get to the White House, and literally nobody took me seriously because they all thought his 2016 campaign was a vanity project, and they didn't understand the circumstances. I do not believe he can get back to the White House now. He's lost the independence. The Republicans are a minority party, not just in California, not just in New York, but all across the country overall. And he's lost the independence, so that's not going to help him at all. When he is forced to give up the businesses through the appointment of a receiver, and that'll happen well before the election, that's going to tarnish him. And then there's been a new development last night. I was here in my hotel room in Brussels, and I think it was Jake Tapper, but one of the CNN correspondents, anchors comes on, and they've gotten an interview with General John Kelly, who was the longest serving Trump chief of staff, a former Marine general, who confirmed on the record every one of the most horrible stories that you've heard about Donald Trump's contempt for the military. That Trump, when he was supposed to go to the sacred to U.S. Marines burial site in France, where in 1918, hundreds of them, I think it was more than 1,000 Marines were killed. Trump not only didn't know about it and didn't care, but he said, why did they do that? What's in it for them? When he went to the USS Arizona memorial, he said, what's this for? What happened here? Why am I here? Doesn't even know about Pearl Harbor and what it means. He thought Finland was part of Russia. And there are a whole bunch of other stories, particularly the one General Mark Milley, who just left as chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, told, that he had a 5-time combat veteran who had been seriously disabled and wounded in the Middle East, who has a beautiful singing voice, sing at a military ceremony Trump went to. And Trump said, nobody wants to see people like that. And don't ever have him shown again. He attacked both George H.W. Bush, who was president, and John McCain, because their planes were shot down as fighter pilots. I mean, we lost over 100,000 airmen in World War II just in Europe because they got shot down. And this kind of disregard, and I have to caution, this is a subject that kind of gets to me. My dad was a 100% disabled veteran of World War II. And so I have some connection to this that's emotional, and readers should take that into account. But all of these stories denigrating the military, indicating he doesn't know anything, and talking in the White House of his love and admiration for murderous dictators and how he wants to be just like Kim and Putin and Xi, all now have been confirmed on the record by Trump's chief of staff, the retired Marine General John Kelly. How can people who love America support a man like this? And the only way you can is you concluded that you hate democracy. And what did Mitt Romney tell us the other day? A lot of people in my party, Republican Party, don't believe in democracy.
Well, this for our next conversation, David, but it seems to me, and I was mentioning this in the last hour, if I'm GOP, I do everything I can to undermine democracy, because democracy will not carry me to power. I mean, if you're out of step with the public, you're out of step with the electorate. So what do? You try to suppress that electorate. You try to jimmy the system. Gerrymandering helps a lot, but this is for another time. But it's a remarkable thing. But it's interesting that you think these things will cut through, because you're so right. He said, quote, "Why should I go to that cemetery? It's filled with losers." In his on that trip to France, and he talked about the people who were killed in France as suckers for getting killed. In wanting that military parade and then seeing all of those who were wounded or injured in battle or in service, he said he wanted that, but he didn't want any wounded guys in the parade. Those are the heroes, Kelly said. In our society, there's only one group of people who are more heroic than they are, and they're buried over in Arlington. I don't want them, Trump said. It doesn't look good for me. Now, we did have reporting on that, David Cay Johnson. What I'm asking you, and the reason I read the quotes is, why do you feel that will newly encumber him in some way in the election? In other words, why will that be now a new weight?
Because up until now, those are all stories based on anonymous sources. Okay. Now we have the chief of staff saying on the record, this is what happened. I mean, listen, I'll be critical of Kelly. I was out there from day one telling people what I knew about who he is, and so were very few others. General Kelly, as long as he was chief of staff, I understand why he wouldn't speak about these things about Trump. But as soon as Trump was out, and certainly no later than January 7th of 2021, he should have been out there talking about these truths. And you're going to see more people now step forward and confirm things. And those stories are going to percolate through the system.
I see. So you think that they'll start to take their place in the news cycle in such a way that they'll have an effect? Sorry,
I'm going to predict two things here, and then because they roll sidewalks early in Brussels, I got to run off or I'm not going to get dinner. Yep. Donald, if things go very badly, will at some point tell his supporters, don't vote, it's a rigged system, as a way to escape the ignominy of being seriously beaten, especially being seriously beaten by Joe Biden. Secondly, do not discount for a minute the prospect that Donald, when he realizes he's going to be convicted, or if he's not immediately taken into custody, which he probably won't be, but knows he's going to be sentenced, fires up the engines on his Boeing 757 and flees.
I'm looking forward to following up on those and
make a note of them. We'll talk about it in the future. Maybe I'm wrong, and you should bring it up if I am.
We will indeed. Hey, thanks for taking time while you're in Brussels to be with us. David Cay Johnson, everybody. Thanks, David. Yeah.
The Mark Thompson Show.
Hi, it's Mark, and I thought that was great. Hit the notification bell. You'll know whenever there's a new video being dropped, and please subscribe to our channel to help us save the universe.